So let's start today with a scenario that I think is going to sound completely trivial on paper.
Okay.
But, it's something everyone listening has experienced. So it's a Tuesday. You're just sitting at your desk. You're waiting for a piece of information.
Right.
Maybe it's a text from someone you've just started dating.
Right.
Or maybe it's feedback on a massive project you just sent over to a client. Your phone is just sitting right there on the desk, screen facing up.
Just staring at you.
Exactly. And then it lights up. You see that little typing bubble appear?
Oh, yeah, the 3 dancing dots.
Right, the dancing dots. And you're waiting, and then they just vanish.
Whew.
No message. Just silence.
Yeah.
And objectively, literally, nothing has happened in the real world. The state of the universe has not changed.
Not at all.
But internally, the temperature in the room suddenly drops. Your chest gets tight. And your mind just instantly starts generating these catastrophic stories.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they're furious with me, or I'm definitely getting fired, or this relationship is totally over. It's this immediate, visceral downward spiral.
Because in that exact moment, to your body, it feels like you are in actual physical danger.
Yes, and that is the exact question I want to start with for this deep dive. Why does a lack of information, literally the absence of data, trigger a physical survival response?
Right.
We like to think of ourselves as these highly rational agents.
Yep.
But in that moment, staring at the phone, we are anything but rational.
And it's because what you're experiencing there isn't just some psychological quirk. It's not just, anxiety, the way we use the word in everyday conversation.
Okay, so what is it?
It is a hardwired biological mechanic. The source material we're digging into today calls this phenomenon neural static.
Neural static. I like that. It sounds almost electrical.
In a very real way, it is electrical. We're talking about a literal breakdown in your brain's signal processing. And really, the whole premise of this deep dive, and this is a major focus for us here at the Source Studios right now, is investigating why the brain actively sabotages our high-stakes decision-making.
Which is a crazy concept, right?
It is, because we aren't talking about why we make mistakes just from being uninformed. We are talking about why, right when the pressure is at its absolute peak, the hardware inside your skull literally shuts down your ability to process reality.
That's a really bold claim.
Yeah.
That the brain is actively sabotaging you. Because I think most of us, we tend to view our brain as our ultimate ally.
Yeah.
The thing that's trying to help us navigate the world. And you're saying it's the saboteur.
Under very specific modern conditions, yes. And to really grasp why this happens, we have to completely dismantle a super common assumption about what the brain actually is.
Okay, let's dismantle it.
Well, if I asked you what the brain's primary job is, what would you normally say?
I'd probably say it's a thinking machine, like a supercomputer. Its job is to take in data, analyze it, find the objective truth, and then tell me what to do next.
And that is the common intuition. But from a biological standpoint, that's entirely incorrect. The brain is not a thinking organ first. It is a prediction organ first.
Okay, wait. Distinguish those two for me. Thinking versus prediction.
Sure. So thinking implies a search for objective truth or logic. You're weighing facts. Prediction, on the other hand, implies a search for safety.
Ah, okay.
Your brain's primary evolutionary mandate, the reason it consumes so much of your body's energy, is survival error minimization.
Survival error minimization.
Exactly. It's running this constant, massive background simulation of the next 5 seconds, the next 5 minutes, and the next 5 hours. And it's basically asking one fundamental question, roughly 10 times every single second.
10 times a second. What's the question?
Am I safe enough to plan?
Wow. Am I safe enough to plan? That's the ultimate gatekeeper.
That is the gatekeeper to your entire conscious experience. If the answer is yes, we are safe, then you get full access to the thinking brain. You get logic, creativity, empathy, strategic foresight.
All good stuff.
All the good stuff. But if the answer is no, or honestly, even if the answer is just maybe, the brain deprioritizes complex cognition entirely.
So when I'm sitting there staring at those disappearing dots on my text message, my brain isn't rationally trying to figure out if that person just got distracted by their dog or something.
Yo.
It's just answering no to the question, am I safe?
Precisely. And because it answers no, it initiates a literal hardware switch. And this brings us to what evolutionary biologists call the evolutionary mismatch.
Right, the mismatch.
Because to understand neural static, you really have to look at the environment where this hardware was originally built. We have to go way back to the ancestral environment.
We do hear that term, evolutionary mismatch, a lot in sort of pop psychology circles. Usually people bring it up about diet, like why we're obsessed with sugar even though it's bad for us now. But how exactly does it apply to how we process information?
Well, think about the data stream for a human being. For 99.7% of our evolutionary history, we lived in an environment of extreme information and scarcity.
Scarcity. Okay, put me on the savannah.
Yeah.
What counts as a signal back then?
A signal is a sudden rustle in the tall grass, or it's a really abrupt silence in the bird calls around you,
Yeah.
or a shift in the wind direction.
Right. Very distinct things.
Highly distinct. They were slow, they were rare, and they were incredibly high stakes.
Because if you miss the rustle in the grass, your dinner, you die.
Exactly. And conversely, if you overreact to the rustle and it turns out to just be the wind, the cost is extremely low. You just burned a few extra calories running up a tree.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. But if you underreact and it's a lion, the cost is infinite. Game over.
So we evolved to be completely paranoid.
We evolved a nervous system that is hyper-tuned to vague, uncertain signals. We are quite literally built from the ground up to treat ambiguity as a mortal threat until proven otherwise.
Okay, so that is the factory setting. We treat ambiguity like a tiger in the bushes.
Yes.
Now let's take that ancient factory setting and drop it into Tuesday morning in the year 2026.
And now we have a massive problem. Because we have transitioned completely from an environment of severe scarcity to an environment of extreme density. We live in a high-density, low-certainty information ecosystem.
And it's really not just the sheer volume of the information, is it? It's the type of information we're dealing with.
It's the simultaneous nature of it. Just picture a normal minute in your morning. You might get a Slack notification from your boss saying, "We need to talk."
Which is terrifying.
Right. And at the exact same time, you get a news alert on your watch about stock market volatility, a text from your partner about a scheduling conflict, and a notification that your rideshare is arriving, all in 60 seconds.
And I am desperately trying to process every single one of those at once.
But here is the glitch. Your brain, that ancient paranoid prediction engine, it doesn't have a neurological category for digital annoyance. It doesn't have a file folder for macroeconomic market volatility.
So what does it do with it?
It interprets every single one of those unresolved inputs as a simultaneous survival variable.
Wait, are you seriously saying my nervous system is treating a little ping on Slack the exact same way it treats a rustle in the bushes from a predator?
In the very initial stage of processing, yes, absolutely. It is flagged as an unresolved alert. And when you have 20 of these alerts happening simultaneously, you enter a physiological state called allostatic overload.
Allostatic overload. Define allostasis for us, just so everyone's on the same page.
Sure. Allostasis is simply your body's process of achieving stability through change. It's how your brain budgets its resources to handle a challenge.
Like sweating when you're hot.
Or if you're running a marathon, your brain intelligently allocates more energy and blood flow to your leg muscles. That's allostasis. So allostatic overload is what happens when the energetic cost of managing all your current inputs exceeds the total energy budget of your system.
The system essentially goes bankrupt.
Completely bankrupt. The brain simply cannot distinguish between informational uncertainty and physical danger. To the deep, ancient centers of your brain, a confusing email thread from a client isn't just an annoyance you can deal with later.
It's a predator you can't see clearly.
Yes. And because you can't see it clearly, you can't predict what it's going to do.
And bringing it back to what you said earlier, because I can't predict it, the answer to the gatekeeper question is no. I am not safe to plan.
You've got it. And this brings us to the actual physiological consequence of that no, because this isn't just some poetic metaphor about feeling stressed out at work. There is a literal, measurable energy crisis that occurs in your brain during this overload. And to understand it, we need to introduce the main character of our consciousness, the prefrontal cortex.
The PST. This is the absolute star of the show.
It really is. The PFC is essentially the CEO of the brain. It sits right up there behind your forehead. And it's responsible for all your high-level executive functions: strategy, impulse control, emotional regulation, complex scenario modeling.
It's the part of you that actively decides not to scream at someone who cuts you off in traffic.
Exactly. Or the part of you that can look at a terrifying dip in a stock chart and rationally say, this is just short-term noise, not a fundamental crash.
It's the adult in the room.
It is the adult in the room. But here is the critical design flaw in humans. The prefrontal cortex is the newest part of the brain, evolutionarily speaking. And because it's so complex, it is incredibly metabolically expensive.
It's a massive gas guzzler.
It is an absolute energy hog. It requires huge, steady, uninterrupted streams of glucose and oxygen just to maintain basic function. In the biological economy of your body, the PFC is a luxury item.
Okay, I see where this is going. So when the body goes into that allostatic overload you mentioned, when the survival budget suddenly gets super tight because of all those alerts.
The luxury item is the very first thing to get cut. This is a phenomenon we call the brownout. It's a very real hemodynamic shift.
Hemodynamic meaning blood flow.
Right. When the brain senses a threat, and remember, high day load is interpreted as a threat, it immediately reallocates blood flow.
Where does all that blood go, if not the thinking brain?
It literally shunts away from the prefrontal cortex, and it rushes down toward the motor cortices and the limbic system.
So it's going to the muscles so you can physically fight or run away.
Yes, and it goes to the deep threat centers so you can react reflexively and quickly.
So if we use an office building analogy here, let's say the building management realizes there isn't enough power on the grid to run the whole skyscraper. So they intentionally cut the lights and the AC to the executive suite on the top floor, just so they can keep powering the security cameras and the alarm systems down in the basement.
That is a brilliant analogy. The CEO is literally sitting up there in the dark. He can't read the financial reports. He can't sign the checks. He can't make any long-term strategic decisions. Meanwhile, the security guards in the basement are running around with flashlights, absolutely screaming.
That paints such a vivid picture. But here is where I always get stuck with this concept. When I am in that spiral, let's say I'm worrying about a huge project deadline or staring at that text message, I don't actually feel like I've shut down.
You don't feel like the lights are out.
No. I feel hyperactive. My mind is racing a million miles an hour. I feel like I'm thinking of 10 different branching scenarios at once. If my so-called thinking brain is offline, why on earth does it feel like I am thinking faster than ever?
And that right there is the great deception of neurostatic. You feel like you are thinking. But biologically, you aren't. You are obsessing. There is a massive functional difference between the two.
Break that difference down for me. What separates thinking from obsessing in this context?
Thinking, which is true executive function, involves taking disparate pieces of information, connecting them, projecting realistically into the future, and most importantly, inhibiting bad impulses.
Right.
What you are doing when you're in the spiral is looping. You are running the exact same 3 terrifying worst-case scenarios over and over and over again. The source material quotes a prominent neuroscientist on this, and the quote is chilling. It says, "You are still conscious, but you are no longer governing."
Oh, wow. Conscious but not governing. That is deeply unsettling.
It is. And functional MRI studies completely confirm that this is a physical reality, not just a metaphor. If you look at the scans, you can actually see the neural connectivity between the PFC and the emotional centers physically degrade.
The wires literally get cut.
The communication breaks down. So you have this massive engine that is revving incredibly high from all the anxiety and chemical energy, but the steering wheel is completely disconnected from the tires.
Which naturally leads us to ask, who exactly is driving the car when the CEO is locked in the dark? We need to talk about the amygdala.
The amygdala. Now, we do need to be a little careful here because pop psychology has done a bit of a disservice to this particular organ over the last decade.
Yeah, it's almost always branded as just the fear center. Like it's just a panic button you hit.
Right. And while it is deeply involved in fear processing, calling it the fear center is honestly like calling a modern smartphone a calculator. I mean, sure, it does that, but it does so much more.
So what's a better definition?
The more accurate definition, and the one the source material leans heavily on, is that the amygdala is the relevance detector.
Relevance detector. That implies it's actively scanning for good things too, not just threats.
Exactly. It's constantly scanning your environment for biological significance. Is this thing food? Is this person a potential mate? Is this situation a physical threat? Is this a status opportunity?
Status opportunity.
Like social status.
Yes. In a highly social species like human beings, your status and your sense of belonging are literal survival needs. If the tribe kicks you out, you die. So the amygdala is constantly running a background check. Does this new input change my standing in the tribe?
So when that text message doesn't come through, the amygdala isn't afraid of the literal piece of glass and metal in my hand.
Yo.
It's flagging a massive relevance event regarding potential social rejection.
You nailed it. And it activates specifically because of a concept called prediction error.
Okay, we are back to the brain as a prediction machine.
We are. So your brain creates a mental model of the future. I will send this text message. They like me, so they will reply. That is the prediction.
Makes sense. But reality delivers something different. I sent the text. There is silence. The gap between your mental prediction and the actual reality is the prediction error. And let me tell you, the amygdala absolutely hates prediction error.
Because an error implies that you fundamentally misunderstand your environment.
And if you don't understand your environment, you cannot survive in it.
Right.
So when that error spikes, the amygdala initiates the hostile takeover. It basically says, the CEO has clearly failed to predict this outcome. I am taking control of the vehicle. And the second it does that, it dumps a massive chemical cocktail into your bloodstream that literally changes who you are in that moment.
And we all know the cast of characters in this chemical cocktail. We're talking adrenaline, cortisol.
Right. Adrenaline and norepinephrine are the first wave. They hit your system instantly. This is the speed phase. Your heart rate jumps, your pupils physically dilate to take in more light, your focus narrows down to an absolute pinprick.
Which, again, is incredibly helpful if you are fighting a wolf in the woods.
It is essential if you are fighting a wolf. You need speed, you need absolute certainty. You really do not want to be standing there pondering the ethical implications of the wolf's behavior.
Right, you just want to stab it and run.
Exactly. But then comes the second wave of the chemical dump, cortisol.
The famous stress hormone.
Cortisol provides the sustained mobilization of energy you need to keep fighting or running. But here is the massive trade-off, and this is so critical for everyone listening to internalize. This whole chemical state drastically increases your speed and your feeling of certainty, but it catastrophically decreases your accuracy and your ability to perceive nuance.
It effectively makes us really fast and really dumb.
It shifts your operating system from complex analysis to basic pattern matching.
And pattern matching is just a heuristic, a cognitive shortcut.
Exactly. It's the rule of, if something even vaguely looks like a snake, jump out of the way. Don't waste time checking if it's actually just a curved stick. Just jump.
You know, this is exactly the kind of biological insight we're always looking for at the Source Studios, because it explains so much irrational behavior.
It really does.
Because when I'm in that spiral about a vague email from my boss, and I suddenly decide, you know what, they hate me, I'm just going to quit right now, I'm essentially jumping away from a stick because my compromised brain thinks it's a snake.
You are operating on a pure heuristic. You have traded strategic accuracy for the immediate feeling of just doing something.
Anything to relieve the tension.
Yes. This is exactly why we send that passive-aggressive text. It's why day traders panic and sell at the very bottom of a market dip. The biology of your body is demanding physical action to resolve the internal tension, even if that action is strategically disastrous for your life.
Man. And this actually brings up a really fascinating point about the specific kind of information we tend to fixate on when we're in this state. The source material spends some time talking about signal degradation.
Yes. And to understand signal degradation, we have to introduce one more part of the brain called the thalamus.
The thalamus.
Think of the thalamus as the bouncer at the extremely exclusive nightclub of your consciousness.
It decides what gets past the velvet rope.
Exactly. Right now, your senses are picking up millions of bits of data. The low hum of the refrigerator, the feeling of your socks against your feet, the shadow moving in your peripheral vision.
But I'm not noticing any of that until you mention it.
Because the thalamus filters 99% of it out, so the CEO, your PFC, can actually focus on what matters.
But when the alarm bells start ringing.
The bouncer panics. He just throws the doors wide open. The filter completely breaks. Under high stress, the thalamus stops differentiating between crucial signal and useless noise.
So you just get flooded with raw data.
You get completely flooded. But the really insidious part is that you specifically start obsessing over microsignals.
Give me a concrete example of a microsignal. How does that look in real life?
Okay, let's go back to the text message scenario. In a normal calm state, you would look at the macro signal. You would look at the fact that you have a 5-year history of deep trust with this person.
Right, the big picture.
But in the neural static state, the macro signal is way too complex for your compromised brain to process. It takes too much energy. So instead, your brain fixates on the micro signal, the timestamp.
Oh no.
You start thinking, okay, the app says read at 2:04 p.m. It is now exactly 2:09 p.m. Why is there a 5-minute gap? What are they doing?
I feel so called out right now. I've absolutely done this exact thing. You become this deranged forensic analyst of details that literally do not matter.
You are meticulously analyzing noise. The signal to noise ratio in your brain has totally collapsed. You are desperately trying to find certainty in data points that contain absolutely no real information.
And this leads right into what I honestly think is the most counterintuitive part of this entire body of research. The source material refers to it as the illusion of clarity.
This is the ultimate danger zone.
See, I would naturally assume that if my brain is completely malfunctioning, the CEO is tied up in the dark and the bouncer has run away from the club, I would assume I would feel deeply confused. I would feel foggy and lost. But the research points out that right before people make a catastrophic error like sending that career-ending email or blowing up their relationship, they don't feel confused. They often feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of certainty. Like, aha, I know exactly what I need to do.
And that feeling is a trap. It is a biological dopamine trap.
Explain that to me. How on earth is dopamine, the reward chemical, involved in making a terrible decision?
Remember the fundamental rule. The brain despises uncertainty. Uncertainty is incredibly metabolically expensive.
Right, it burns a lot of energy.
It burns massive energy to hold two conflicting, highly charged possibilities in your working memory. Maybe my boss is firing me, or maybe my boss is just having a busy day. Holding both of those requires the PFC. The brain desperately wants to collapse that wave function. It wants to settle on a single, simple story.
It just wants the tension to end.
It wants what psychologists call limbic closure. When the internal pressure gets too high, the brain will force a narrative just to relieve the metabolic tension. It will decisively conclude, they are definitely firing me.
Even though that is a objectively terrible outcome.
It doesn't matter, because the mere certainty of the outcome triggers a massive release of dopamine.
Wow.
It actually feels incredibly good to finally know. It
Yeah.
feels like relief. You tell yourself, I knew it. I knew they were plotting against me. And your brain gives you a rush of chemical validation.
So that powerful feeling of, aha, I finally see the truth, that might literally just be a stress-induced hallucination.
In high-stakes, high-pressure situations, yes. If you suddenly feel a lightning-fast flash of total certainty that neatly simplifies a highly complex problem into a stark black and white issue, it is almost certainly neural static.
It's not a brilliant insight.
No. It is simply your brain giving up on the hard work of thinking in order to save energy.
It is profound. We routinely confuse the relief from anxiety with actual clarity of thought.
That right there is the core mechanism of the sabotage. We take drastic action not to solve the external problem, but purely to solve our own internal metabolic discomfort.
Okay, I have to say, we have painted a fairly bleak picture of the human condition so far. We've got an outdated ancestral brain, an energy supply that bails on us when we need it most, and a reward system that literally gives us a cookie for jumping to the worst possible conclusion. It really feels like we are hardwired to fail in the modern world.
It can definitely feel that way when you're caught in the middle of it. But the good news here, and there is good news, is that once you clearly understand the mechanic, you can start to hack it.
Okay?
You can't stop the signal from coming in, but you can entirely manage the receiver.
Because the source material is explicitly clear on one major point. You cannot out-discipline the limbic system.
No, you absolutely cannot willpower your way out of a cortisol spike. That alarm system is 100 million years older than your conscious mind.
It's too deeply rooted.
Trying to stop it with sheer willpower is like trying to stop a runaway freight train by standing on the tracks and asking it really nicely to slow down.
So what is the actual move then, if we can't stop the train?
We have to out-engineer it. We have to consciously build structures and protocols into our lives that step in when our biology inevitably fails. And honestly, this is a huge focus for us over at the Source Studios, figuring out how to turn these deep biological insights into practical, everyday protocols.
So let's get into the protocols. Let's talk about tactic number 1 from the research. The source calls this concept decoupling.
Decoupling decision from information. If you take nothing else away from today, this is the golden rule for surviving high-stakes environments.
Break that down for the listener.
Well, most of us naturally function in a continuous read-react loop. We read an intense email, which is the information, and our hands immediately start typing out a reply, which is the decision. We process the input and execute the output in the exact same breath.
It feels seamless. It feels productive.
It is seamless, and it is incredibly dangerous. Because if that piece of information triggered any kind of threat response in your amygdala, you are currently making the decision while your prefrontal cortex is actively browning out.
You're letting the terrified security guard write the email.
Exactly. The protocol here is to intentionally insert a hard physical gap between receiving the information and making the decision.
The source used a brilliant example here about professional poker players. And I loved this because high-stakes poker is essentially just a game of managing extreme prediction error.
It is the perfect laboratory for this. A professional poker player can play a hand mathematically perfectly, do everything right, and still lose $1 million simply because of bad luck. In poker, they call it a bad beat.
And that is a massive prediction error for the brain.
Huge. Now, when an amateur player takes a bad beat, they usually get angry. They go on what's called tilt. Their amygdala completely takes over, and they start playing the very next hand super aggressively just to try and make up for the painful loss.
They were actively chasing the dopamine of a quick win to fix the emotional pain of the loss.
Correct. But if you watch the true professionals, the seasoned veterans, after they take a brutal bad beat, they almost always stand up.
Really, they just leave.
They literally leave the table, they walk away, they go to the bar, they get a glass of water, they walk a slow lap around the casino floor.
They aren't walking away to strategize, though, are they?
Not at all. They are metabolizing. They are explicitly waiting for the chemical half-life of the adrenaline and cortisol to dissipate from their bloodstream.
How long does that take?
It takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes for the HPA axis, the body's primary stress response system, to fully downregulate. They are literally just waiting for the blood to flow back into their prefrontal cortex.
They are rebooting the human computer.
Yes. They are deeply aware that they absolutely cannot trust their own judgment for that 20-minute window. So they physically remove themselves from the environment where judgment is required.
So translating this for the listener, this means if you get that vague text message that makes your stomach suddenly drop,
You do not reply. You do not even open the app to draft a reply. You put the phone in a drawer. You walk into another room. You drink a glass of cold water. And you wait 20 minutes.
you just wait.
You have to fundamentally treat your own brain as compromised hardware for that duration.
I really like that framing.
Right.
Treating yourself as compromised hardware, it completely removes the shame from the equation. It's not that you're weak-minded. It's just that your system is undergoing a mandatory reboot.
Exactly. It's just biology.
Yeah.
Now, tactic 2 shifts from managing the crisis to preventing the crisis. We talked earlier about allostatic overload, the sheer density of information we face. We have to address the input side of the equation.
This is what the source calls environmental filters.
Yes. Most modern knowledge workers live in a perpetual open loop state. We have our email inbox open on a second monitor all day long. We have Slack open. We have a news ticker running. We are constantly passively scanning the horizon for threats.
But we feel like we have to do that.
Yeah.
We feel like if we miss a crucial message for 5 minutes, we're failing at our jobs.
Socially, maybe it feels that way. But biologically, keeping those loops open keeps your amygdala in a constant state of simmering activation. It never gets the signal to fully stand down.
It's like keeping your car parked but revving the engine at 4,000 RPM all day.
Exactly. Eventually, the engine is going to overheat and blow a gasket.
So what's the practical fix? Because most of us can't just quit our corporate jobs and move to a cabin in the woods.
No, but you can engineer discrete intervals. This is essentially batching your attention. You consciously decide to check your email only at 9:00 a.m., 11:00 a.m., and 3:00 p.m. And in between those specific intervals, the application is closed.
Closed, like completely quit out of it, not just minimized.
Completely closed. If the program is just minimized in the background, a subconscious part of your brain is still continuously allocating precious energy to monitoring it. When you fully close it, you send a clear biological signal to your nervous system. The threat window is now closed. You are safe to stand down and focus.
It allows the system to finally discharge all that built-up tension.
It allows for recovery. The human body requires oscillation. Stress, then recovery. Stress, then recovery. If your environment is just stress, stress, stress with no breaks, the system fractures. And this exact principle is why commercial airline pilots rely so heavily on checklists during emergencies.
Oh, connect that for me. Checklists and stress recovery.
Imagine an engine fails mid-flight. The pilot is obviously terrified. Their biology is screaming at them. In that moment of extreme panic, their working memory, which is essentially the scratch pad in your brain where you hold active thoughts, shrinks to almost zero capacity.
Because of the brownout.
Right. They literally cannot remember a complex multi-step procedure.
So the physical checklist acts as an external brain.
It is a cognitive prosthesis. It is a highly structured logic tree that safely exists outside of their biological mind. They don't have to rely on their compromised PFSI to think, they just have to read. Step 1, fuel pump off. Step 2, master breaker on.
We absolutely need checklists for our personal lives.
Yeah.
Like a bad news checklist.
100%. And you have to write it down when you are in a calm state.
Right.
It might look like, when I feel totally overwhelmed by an email, step 1, close the laptop physically. Step 2, do box breathing for 2 full minutes. Step 3, write down the absolute worst case scenario on a piece of paper. Step 4, do not respond for 1 hour.
So when the panic hits, you don't have to make a decision about what to do. You just blindly follow the script you wrote for yourself.
It takes the entire burden off the CEO when the CEO is currently out to lunch.
That is incredibly practical. Now, as we get near the end here, I want to pivot to the long-term view, because everything we've unpacked so far is acute. It's about how to handle the specific moment of crisis.
Right.
But the source material asks a much bigger, almost philosophical question. Can we actually upgrade the hardware? Can we fundamentally get better at handling the static over time?
And the answer lies in neuroplasticity, the scientifically proven idea that the brain can continuously rewire its own physical structure based on experience.
But the research points out that neuroplasticity actually cuts both ways, right?
It really does. The source gives a very stark warning about a process called sensitization.
What does that mean in this context?
If you are constantly triggering your alarm system, living in chronic stress, constant data overload, perpetual open loops, and you never ever give your brain a chance to recover, you actually physically strengthen the neural pathways leading straight to the amygdala.
So you basically get really, really good at freaking out.
You become an absolute virtuoso of panic. The threshold for what triggers your threat response gets lower and lower every single month.
That explains so much.
5 years ago, a massive company-wide crisis used to trigger you. Today, a slightly weird look from a barista at the coffee shop triggers a full spiral. Your amygdala actually grows in physical density.
That is the best explanation for burnout I have ever heard. Burnout isn't just being tired, it's walking around with a completely hair-trigger alarm system.
Exactly. But thankfully, the reverse mechanism is also true. We can consciously act to strengthen what is called top-down regulation.
Top-down regulation, that sounds a bit technical. Break that down.
It simply refers to the neural fibers that run downward from the prefrontal cortex directly to the amygdala. Think of these fibers as your brain's brake cables.
Okay.
A well-trained, strong PFC can look at the panicking amygdala and say, I see the signal you're sending, but it's not a tiger. It's just a Slack message. Stand down. And if those cables are strong enough, the amygdala actually listens and shuts off the alarm.
And we can intentionally thicken those brake cables.
We can. Practices like daily mindfulness meditation, controlled breathwork protocols, and even voluntary discomfort training, things like intense cold plunges or really grueling exercise. These all specifically train that inhibitory pathway.
Wait. How exactly does sitting in a freezing cold ice bath help me not freak out when I'm answering emails at work?
Think about the exact biological process of a cold plunge. You step into freezing water. Instantly, your body's survival system screams, danger, get out immediately, you are dying.
Right, that's the bottom-up signal from the amygdala.
Exactly. But you, the conscious executive agent, you use your PFC to say, no, I know it feels like we are dying, but we are perfectly safe. I am choosing to stay in this. You are literally forcing the CEO to overpower the screaming security guard.
You're doing physical reps for your brain.
You are doing heavy reps for your inhibitory control. Every time you do that, you are teaching your nervous system a brand new algorithm. You are teaching it. Intensity is not the same thing as danger.
Intensity is not danger. That is a powerful reframe.
That is the core operating mantra of every elite performer on Earth. The trauma surgeon, the special forces soldier, the crisis hostage negotiator. When the utter chaos starts around them, their brain does not label the situation as threat. It labels it as complexity.
And just by changing the label.
Because they label it complexity, the answer to the gatekeeper question is, yes, I am safe to plan. And the blood stays locked right there in the prefrontal cortex where they need it.
So having clarity in a crisis isn't just a lucky personality trait.
Oh.
It's not that some people are just magically born chill.
Not at all. Clarity is a trained physiological state. It is a physical structure that you have to build through reps, not a genetic gift you receive at birth.
That is incredibly empowering. It means we aren't just helpless victims of our ancient biology, we're just untrained operators of some very complicated machinery.
That's exactly the view we take here at the Source Studios. We're all walking around operating highly advanced machinery, and nobody ever bothered to hand us the user manual.
It's so true. Now, there was one final, almost poetic thought in the source material that really stuck with me. It was about the fundamental role of human civilization itself.
Ah, yes, the concept of civilization as a shield.
The idea that we built all these things, offices and legal systems and polite email etiquette and highly structured scheduled meetings, essentially as a giant mechanism to
Right.
protect our own cortex.
It really is a beautiful way to look at it, because the natural world is pure chaos. And the inner animal inside our heads is incredibly volatile and reactive.
Right.
So human civilization is basically just a complex set of external structures designed to artificially create a safe space for the prefrontal cortex to operate without constantly fighting off tigers.
We are desperately trying to protect that delicate, metabolically expensive patch of tissue behind our foreheads from the loud, terrified animal running around beneath it.
Exactly. We built a world where it is finally safe enough to think. So when we succumb to the spiral, when we let the neural static completely take over and dictate our actions, we are essentially undoing thousands of years of that collective work.
We're reverting back to the savannah.
We are reverting. The ultimate challenge of modern life isn't just managing our inboxes. It is fighting to maintain our fundamental humanity, our reason, our deep empathy, our ability to strategize in a digital environment that is constantly, relentlessly trying to pull us back down into the lizard brain.
Wow. That brings up such a provocative thought for me. Because if the digital environment is currently the thing causing the overload, what happens is AI gets better at perfectly predicting our preferences.
That's fascinating.
Right. What if the ultimate luxury in the future isn't having access to more information, but actually having the wealth and the tools to intentionally curate ignorance?
To intentionally build walls against the static.
Exactly. To fiercely protect your cortex by radically limiting what you allow yourself to know about the world at any given moment.
I think that's exactly where we're headed.
So for everyone listening to this right now, here is your actionable takeaway. The very next time you see those 3 dots disappear, the next time your boss sends that ominous "we need to talk" message, the next time the market drops and your portfolio flashes red,
You're going to feel the physical hit.
you're going to feel your chest tighten, you're going to feel the heat rise in your face. But when you do not believe the terrifying story your brain instantly starts writing.
Because that story is written by the terrified security guard.
Exactly. Instead, I want you to actively label it out loud. Tell yourself, this is just neural static.
This is a brownout. My hardware is currently compromised.
Step away from the keyboard, put the phone in the drawer, decouple the intense information for the permanent decision.
Wait 20 minutes, let the CEO wake up and turn the lights back on.
Because the frantic story your brain writes in the absolute dark is almost never the true story.
Never. True clarity is slow. True clarity is calm. If a decision feels frantically urgent and intensely emotional, it is almost certainly not clarity. It is just fear wearing a clever costume.
Fear wearing a clever costume.
Yep.
I absolutely love that. We are going to wrap it up right there. This has been a deep dive from all of us here at the Source Studios. We really hope this framework helps you navigate the noise of your life just a little bit better this week.
Keep those prefrontal cortexes online, everyone. Protect the CEO.
Thanks so much for listening. We will see you all in the next one.